This is the Balanced Advisor Podcast with Dr. Travis Perry, helping financial advisors like you achieve balance in their lives.
Welcome to another episode of the Balanced Advisor Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Perry. Today I have with us Kyle Moore. Kyle is from St. Paul, Minnesota, and he founded Quarry Hill Advisors in 2017. They provide comprehensive financial planning to 150 households and manage $200 million on their behalf. Welcome, Quarry, to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's fun to chat with you in the pre-show about a little bit about your business and what you've been able to be, about in this industry. But tell us, how did you get here? Was there a direct path? Did you fall into it? Was there, a special event that happened that made you come this way?
It was a little bit of an indirect path. I think as many people who want to become financial advisors, you don't really know what the best path is from the start. It's not super clear, and there's a lot of different options. I played professional golf for almost 5 years and had some conversations with friends who are advisors at Fidelity, and it sounded really interesting. I wanted to go down that path when I was, realized I wasn't good enough to make it as a professional golfer. So I had conversations with them and then other people as well, just trying to understand the landscape. I interviewed at the wirehouses and got into their programs, but ultimately I was not ready to, hand over a list of my friends and family. It just wasn't really the way I wanted to start in the industry. So I was really fortunate to land on the FPA and met somebody through the FPA who made me aware of the career fair. And I went to that and ended up getting hired at a great smaller RIA up here in Minnesota. So that was kind of my winding path into the profession.
Yeah, and that's kind of the truth for so many. There's a winding path, and I love that you were about it, but you kind of finally found yourself there. In 2017, you made this split to become basically your own business owner and get out there and hang your own shingle. Tell us, what was the impetus to that?
Well, there was a number of things. I mean, I had a really great situation I was in. It was not one that most people would have left, I think. But for me, it was just something that an itch I couldn't scratch at that place. I wanted to start my own thing. I wanted to be my own boss, do things my way. I could have stayed there and bought into partnership eventually and had a great career still. But there was just something about being on my own that really was attractive to me. I had some friends who did the same thing a couple of years before through the XY Planning Network. So following their journey every week, every month on our calls was really interesting to me. I got excited about it. And ultimately I decided that, now is the time for me to forge my own path and do it myself.
That's great. Yeah, you had to scratch that itch, right? You had to be able to get out there on your own. I was there in 2007. It was just, I got into the industry thinking that this would be something that I could market myself. And you're right. Those big wirehouses, big firms, BDs, they want to, unfortunately, kind of keep you captive and at the expense of compliance, it keeps you from being able to market the way you want to be able to do it. So right. I'm with you. I understand. Now, for me, I went and started my own business and felt like, man, I really lost a whole lot of balance because I did have a lot of structure that I left. It was like building the business, getting the software, doing all the things. And it really kind of pulled me out of my definition of balance. Curious about your definition of balance. Let's talk about that a little bit. Like maybe you have an analogy or a definition or something that you're like, yeah, Travis, this is it. This is my definition of balance. What would you say, Kyle?
Well, I think for me, and I know it's different for everybody, but for me, I want to be able to spend the time on the things that I want to spend time on in the proportion that I want to use that time with. So, I want to be there for my kids. I want to be a good husband. I want to be a good friend. I also want to run a successful business, and I don't want any of those things to take away from any of the other things. So I kind of see balance as sort of having it all, and it's a very difficult equilibrium to strike, but I think I've done a pretty decent job of it. But obviously when you first start your own company, it's really difficult. And even running your own company, it's always difficult because there's things that pop up that you're the only one that really has the ability to handle it. And so you got to come in. So I would say, yeah, for me, in a nutshell, it's just really spending time on the things that I want to spend time with.
Yeah. If I was to press you on that, say, what is it? What are your top things, top three where you like to spend your time?
Well, I think family is most important to me. The business is really important to me too, making sure that's going well. I also like to have time for myself. I like to play golf. It's still an important thing in my life. And, if I can put all three of those things together and everybody's happy, then I feel like I'm living a pretty good life.
Yeah. So you feel like you're paying attention to the family, you're getting out on the greens, and business is going well, that things are rocking.
Yeah. But there's always a tension. I mean, I have young kids. I have 8 and 5, and, golf takes a lot of time. And so I try to borrow time from the business for golf, especially because it can impact the business positively. But still, hey, I could spend this Friday afternoon playing golf, or I could spend it with my family. So there's a number of ways in which there are tensions between just those three.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. What do you do? I'm going to push you a little bit on this as well, because this is a hot item. Like, I mean, there is a balance, and some will say, oh, it's not exactly equilibrium, but it is, in my opinion. I've interviewed close to 500 financial advisors on this topic. And really, it's like when they're living their top priorities, they're doing the things that are most important to them, they feel that balance. What do you do to try to ease those tensions of, oh, I really want to go golf, I want to be with the family, I need to be at the office? What has been something that's helped you to try to make sure that you don't feel those tensions or stress as much as you do?
I think it's just listening to the feedback around you. I mean, golf would be the lowest priority of those things. And if my golf game's bad, that's a certain feedback that I'm not playing enough golf. But I would much rather that be the case than have my family say, hey, we're not seeing enough of you, or my, business suffering in some sort of way. So you go through seasons too. Obviously in Minnesota, you can't golf all year round. So golf is kind of condensed into a certain part of the year. And I structure our business and meetings with clients, an annual calendar where we meet in the spring and the fall. So the spring and fall is heavy business. But summer and winter tries to be, pretty heavy with the family. But if there's feedback coming in that direction from the family that, hey, we want to see you more, we want to do more, or you're too distracted when you're with us, then you got to listen to that, because otherwise you're just going to miss out.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Listen to the feedback. But I also like when we talk about seasons. I'm a big proponent of times and seasons. There may be times in your life, or maybe you have to be really focused on something for a minute, or a season in which, hey, business is going to be a little bit busier. I know fall is conference season, right, for this industry. So it's like my wife and family know that we're going to be traveling. I like to take them with me, or it may mean that I'm leaving them a little bit more if I can't. So that's important. I'd like that you mentioned that. It does lead for a balance, which I think is all honestly out of balance all the time. We're always trying to, to get to those top priorities. I appreciate this. What would you say over time has been maybe one of the biggest issues now that you've built this business, you're successful at it, you're doing well, and you're wanting to get to that next level, but you're maybe thinking, gee, I don't want to lose the balance that I already have. I don't want to add to that. What do you think your biggest struggle or issue might be around that topic?
Well, I see it as a trade-off between time and income. And you can either milk the business and get as much out of it as possible. But eventually that income is going to have a price, and that price is going to be your time. Because if you're not hiring somebody to come in and take over the additional load as the business grows, then it's all going to be coming from your schedule. If you want to grow. So I think for me, thinking about the future right now, it's thinking about, well, when do we hire? I think that's just how you solve it. Otherwise, it's going to be requiring more from us. And if we don't want to spend more time and work a lot longer hours during the weeks, then, that additional income has to get reinvested in the business. You bring somebody else in to take that load off of your shoulders.
Yeah, so true. And a lot of times when we're able to hire, we can delegate. What do you think are some of the biggest struggles for advisors out there who aren't able to hire, aren't able to delegate? What have you seen that specifically say, yeah, this is what's causing some of the pain that inevitably comes back to their balance? What do you think it might be for them?
I think there's two issues. Number one would be, if you aren't able to hire, it might just mean you're not managing the business well enough. You haven't really given enough thought to how much you need to charge, how many people you can work with given your service model. It's a formula that you have to figure out, and you have to figure out how much money you want to make. And all that goes into, when you can actually hire somebody. And so you have to really be living in the future a bit and projecting things out to figure out when you can hire and how do you run a profitable business. And right now, that's something that we're dealing with again. We've hired 3 people, but we need to think about the next hire and when that person is going to come in. And fortunately, though, we have the profitability to be able to reinvest in whoever that next person is. In terms of delegation, though, I fortunately have never had to learn how to delegate. I think by nature a delegator. I'm not a micromanager. I just want to give it to somebody because I don't want to do it. And, you have to bring aboard people who are excited about those things that you give them, that want to do the things that you give them. So fortunately, we have some people around us now, or I have people around me that like doing things that I don't like to do, which is great. And I can just freely give it to them and not have to worry about it. I trust them. I don't need to triple check their work. It's a great relationship. And so you have to find that person, obviously. So number one, you have to be willing to not micromanage and give it to somebody, but it also has to be a trustworthy person whose work that you believe in. Otherwise, you will tend to micromanage that person. So there's a lot there. I mean, I've made a mistake in that area too, and it's hard to delegate to a person that you don't trust. So you really have to make a good hire.
Yeah, and you're leaving us hanging on that. I don't know if you can expound a little bit more. Looking back, we've all made mistakes on hiring or not hiring to begin with. But I'll ping you on this in just a second. But one of the things that's come up several times when I've asked these types of questions about delegation is that sometimes we're so, we struggle so much with actually delegating that it never gets there. But there's other people out there, other advisors who are like, yeah, I want to delegate so quickly that they don't do the training, that they miss out on like the actual walking through. And this is how you do it. They just expect that it gets done. And I've seen both. And I've quite honestly, sometimes have probably leaned on either end of that. For you, it sounds like you're more of like, let me delegate. I want to find people who are excited to take this. But what do you do for training? Like, how do you train this person? What do you do to really get that offloaded without it, dropping the baton, so to speak, in this relay race?
That's a great question. It's a struggle because as a small employer, a small firm, you don't have a formal training process laid out that's been tried and tested and that people glide through, and what you're going to receive at the end of this 2-year process. You're kind of winging it. And so for me, I really had to bring in people that are hungry, willing to learn, and willing to sort of learn on the fly and as things come up. And so you have to be sensitive to what you're putting the person through, and your expectations have to be in line. But for me, it had to be kind of the right type of person to be able to go through that. And I would say that in the interviews too, say, hey, I don't have a formal training process. You're going to have to learn and get comfortable making mistakes. And then we're going to learn from that type of thing. And I'm not going to hold you to the fire over these mistakes, because I'm willing to let a few of them happen by giving you this autonomy. So it's a struggle though, because we're not a big firm. And so you have to be willing to see a person fail a little bit, and they have to be comfortable failing a little bit as well in order for them to really learn and get better.
Yeah. So you put a lot of emphasis on who you hire, like their personality, their willingness to learn, willing to basically learn on the fly. So as you interview them, are you telling them that like, hey, we're a small firm. We really want you to learn as you go and really be willing to be trained, in the process. Is that how it's been working for you guys?
Yeah, for the two advisors that we hired, Shelly and Thomas, it's definitely the case. And they've done a phenomenal job and have picked things up so quick and really learned how we're doing everything. For our operations manager, she was very experienced. So one of the I think kind of errors I made early on, my first hire, was hiring somebody with no experience who I thought would have the skills for the job, and just turned out not to really have the skills for the job, not the detail orientation. She had, great disposition and personality, but not that attentiveness to detail and the ability to just kind of hammer out, the really sort of mundane work of the day. So we ended up going with an experienced hire in that regard. And that really saved us a lot, because that's a very core position in keeping the firm running. But when it came to advisory hires, it was, hey, here's how we operate, and you got to be okay with that. But you're going to learn a ton. But I'm not going to be sitting with you an hour every morning teaching you something. It's going to be, hey, take this as far as you can go, and then put time on my calendar and we'll review it together. And then you're going to learn every time we do that.
Yeah, so that's a great process. Is this continual learning, continual training, and getting people up to speed. Now, we've been talking what I call like the defense. I know you're a golfer, but you're familiar with other sports, I'm sure. Did you do any team sports, basketball, soccer, baseball, football? What else did you do out there?
Yeah, I did all those, basically: basketball, soccer, baseball, hockey.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting because it's like, well, if you have a good offense, you don't need a good defense. No, you need a balanced team, right? Otherwise, you're just going to rack up the points against you, and that's frustrating. So you've got a good defense in play. Like we've been talking about building the team, having the delegation. On the offensive side, I know a lot of firms, and you're not one to probably brag about the success, but you're very successful here in what you've done. But the offensive part of like gaining new clients and scaling that, what has been the biggest struggle for you as a firm that way, now that you have a lot of the defense in place?
Well, fortunately, looking back, I mean, the growth hasn't been a pain point, I would say. There's been times where we've had a lot of growth, but then there's been times where we've had very dry months and I'm wondering what's wrong. But, so I can't say that there haven't been times where I've really questioned what I was doing and got nervous about the growth trajectory. But looking back, from where I was when I started to where I am now after 5 years, I wouldn't have expected that at the start. So it feels really good. We have a great pipeline in place too of people wanting to work with us. So, we've leveraged 3 different areas. One's local search, one's personal network, and another one is more content related marketing for some of our niches of people just Googling different problems they're facing. And so between those 3, we've had just a decent amount of steady stream of new clients coming aboard. So we've had to put in a wait list and whatnot. So I know it's not that doesn't work. That methodology won't work for everybody, but being in control of your marketing as we can on the independent side has really helped in creating those avenues.
Yeah, I love that. Be more specific on the being in control. What part of that do you feel like, this isn't, just referrals and waiting on that kind of a thing, but you are more in control. What would you say has been the biggest thing that tipped the scales?
I think having control over your web presence is very important. Being able to put yourself out there, put your expertise out there. And, a lot of the compliance departments at bigger firms are, I guess, afraid of new things and maybe are trying to create rules against the lowest common denominator within the firm. And so when you're independent and you have your own compliance department, you can just move a lot faster, and you can change based on new things. So I know Bjorn, when he was at his prior firm, they wouldn't let him go on Michael Kitces's podcast because because it was a podcast and they had no way of archiving it, they said. And so he's like, well, people do radio shows. And they said, well, we can archive a radio show. So they literally couldn't, they had not adapted to what is essentially equivalent to a radio show and a podcast. Now, when you're independent and you run your own compliance department, you see the obvious, disconnect there. And I think that opens up a lot of opportunities for being small. If you're in a big firm, it's sort of like, turning a cruise liner, right, as opposed to running a speedboat. And so I think the timing was right for me to start my own firm and have the ability to put myself out there on the internet.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. And you're exactly right. Coming from, a very strict compliance department, Northwestern, you can't even market yourself at this point, let alone have a web presence back in the day. But, I've seen them come a little bit further. I've seen a lot of big broker dealers realize in order to compete, they're going to have to be. So I applaud what you're doing, and I applaud what other advisors do. Not only is it successful for you in attracting clients, it's also helping move the industry to, be more, if it really is about this relationship of trust, to really understand and who they're working with. What advisor, are we getting here? In fact, I pulled up an advisor at another Northwestern just the other day and I realized, wow, they actually let them give like pictures and a little bit of background about their life, but that's about all. So it's an interesting dichotomy here, where still most of the advisors I meet have come through that path. I always like to ask, how'd you get in the industry? Most still have come through a big BD or an insurance brokerage at first, and then kind of have made their way out into independent waters. So very, very fascinating. I love it. What do you see as maybe some of the biggest issues for scaling, for balance, scaling while keeping your balance for other advisors? I know we talked about delegation a little bit, but maybe even just balance in general. What are you seeing for other advisors that are really struggling with balance? What are some of the things that come up? You've hired some of your own, you've rubbed shoulders with a lot of people in FPA and XY planning, spoken for a lot of those groups. So I'm well aware of some of the issues there, but maybe if you can bring some of those to light, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, a lot of advisors, they don't set the right precedents with their clients and right expectations. So one thing I learned a lot from Matthew Jarvis and going through his program a while ago was he's somebody who's maybe even just hyper aware of clients' perception and wanting to set the right expectations. And I learned a lot from that because clients, a lot of times you're the only advisor they've ever worked with. So they don't know what to expect from you. They don't know whether you're going to return a phone call on the weekends or whether you're going to, be open to meeting after hours or whatever it might be. And so as advisors, we all want to help people and we want to do what we can for everybody. It's sort of in our nature, I think. But saying yes to those things all the time and not having the right boundaries will burn you out big time. And it also, it upsets the scaling process if you've got a bunch of different clients who want different things from you. So for us, I'm always weighing that of, okay, this client wants this. Is this something that we're willing to do, or do we have to set a precedent or set a boundary? And a lot of those times, anytime we learn something, we put it in our client engagement standards at the beginning of a relationship to show people, hey, here's something we dealt with another client. And because of that, we want to make it clear to you that this is what you can expect from us. And this is what we expect from you for this relationship to work. And so sometimes that is, we put our business hours on there, when we're going to return phone calls, when we're going to return emails, when we are going to meet with them, when we won't meet with them. And then we structured a pretty, I think, intentional financial planning process throughout the year where we deal with certain topics in the spring and certain topics in the fall. And then we do certain deliverables throughout the year for clients. And that puts everybody in the same, it's a train that's moving with all clients on it at the same time, rather than doing one thing for one client this week and another thing for another the next week. Obviously things come up and you're dealing with different things like that as they come up in clients' lives. But having really intentional processes and solid boundaries, I think is really important. And that's, if you have a smooth running business and client service process, then it's going to be hard to get burned out. But if you're trying to be all things to all people, you're going to run yourself into the ground.
Burnout's a big issue. It's huge. I call it being stuck in the workaholic trap. And my listeners know I've been, talking about this pretty much every episode. But if you don't have these boundaries, it is so easy just to slide into that trap where, all of a sudden you are working nights and weekends. I remember that was the expectation when I first got into the industry. You work nights, you work weekends for the first 5 years. And then when you get to first 100 clients, you can start scaling back. And I thought, no, I'm not doing that. That's crazy. That's not what I got into this industry for. I got it to be flexible, have my own freedom and schedule, and, make really great money helping people. Mm-hmm. And once I put my foot down and said, no, I'm not doing that, I actually made a lot more money. I started working with people who didn't meet nights and weekends, who didn't have, plus, it doesn't always mean that those who are making a lot of money are, have great boundaries. I know that's not true, but you tend to have a higher level of clientele generally. And when you have a client that wants things, emails, text, stuff over the weekend, you've got to be able to say no. That's crucial. I appreciate that. Kyle, it's been great talking to you. If you could go back and say, man, this is what I wish I knew, 10 years ago as an advisor, if there's something I would have done better to, establish that balance and to help myself scale faster without losing my balance, what do you think it would be?
Honestly, things have worked out so well for me that it's hard to say I'd go back and do this differently. Other than, I think if you're married, just being on the same page as your spouse and trying to set the right expectations with them as well. I mean, it's hard starting a business and especially our type of business. It's one that you're pretty undercompensated for a while, and it's just difficult to get started. It's difficult to get off the ground, and it just requires something from the whole family. Ultimately, hopefully there's a payoff down the road, but I think, I could have handled that better for sure from the start. And, just being really intentional with who you partner with and bring aboard. The team makes all the difference. So you got to put in a lot of work in terms of figuring out who that next person is. It's a really crucial hire. And so once you get there, if you can bring the right people aboard, it just makes everything a lot easier.
Well said. Yeah, I've had a number of hosts guests that have said, hey, that first hire is your most difficult one. After that, you can really start to figure that out. So be intentional with who you bring on board. Make sure you're on the same team with your spouse and your family. Really great point. In the last part of the book, Achieving Balance, we talk about this. You got to develop together. You got to develop as a couple. You got to develop as a family. And, they've got to be on board to know what's going on as you're starting that career. Well said. Thank you, Kyle. Thanks for being here. Thanks for making time to be on this podcast and for giving back to the industry. I'm sure our listeners are going to be excited to hear from you. If they want to reach out to you, they want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
You can just look me up on LinkedIn, send me an email, kyle@quarryhilladvisors.com. Happy to chat. A lot of people have helped me get to where I am here today and are doing work like you've done, Travis. And I'm happy to pay that forward to anybody who needs a little bit of a push.
Wonderful. Appreciate your offer and for being willing and open to being on the show and giving back. It is truly a great industry to be involved in with people like you. So thanks again.
Thank you, Travis.